Okay, so yeah, in essence, I'm gonna open up the screen share in a moment. Share screen, and you should be able to see it right about now. Do you? Give me a click yes. Okay. Welcome. Perfect. So yeah, like this is the game that we're gonna be looking into, and let's like right. You can hop into the call as well, since it's only the three of us. We can basically speak. Yes, that is better. So welcome as well. Hi there. So yeah, this is essentially the game that we're gonna be doing, and since there is not too many of us, we can make this more of a discussion. So since it is your game, do tell me, how do you analyze both of your teams, or both of those teams? Who do you think scales better? Like, what are your thoughts when you look into the team comps like this? Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. Casper, anything you wanna add? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's fair. Like your analysis of that was pretty solid. Now, generally, when it comes to scaling, Jax has scaling that is essentially insane. More the scales well, but the catch is in the thing that more the scaling depends on who he ends up catching. Catching a Jax, he's going to lose that. He cannot kill a Jax even inside of his ultimate. Catching an Amumu is essentially pointless because Amumu is going to be a pure tank and, well, makes no sense really. Catching a LeBlanc could work if he plays it out well. He can end up getting a kill on her, so that would not be a bad idea. Going for Caitlyn or Vel'Koz also like works pretty well, because just locking in one of the red team's carries is bound to make a difference. But that is essentially going to be his primary use if this game ends up getting to the super late game. Like, just lock one of them down and zone them out from the fight itself, and it should ideally be someone who is not strong enough so that he can actually kill Warrior in a one-on-one. So essentially he scales well, but comes down to who he ends up catching. Jax, insanely good scaling. He's gonna be extremely good in team fights, extremely good frontline. He's gonna be extremely good split pushing, so he's really a champion that can do it all. So he's really top notch. Amumu has amazing scaling, but he is quite simply a supporty champion in the late game. He's basically gonna be acting quite a lot as a meat shield for the rest of the red team, and he's gonna end up being a CC bot. His Q, his ultimate, That's all that is pretty nice. Like he can do a lot with it, but that is also where we end up essentially finding Amumu's biggest weakness, which is Silas. So whenever you have a champion such as Amumu, who is extremely dependent on the ultimate and who really has an ultimate that is game changing, Silas is an amazing pick into that. Silas stealing Amumu's ultimate is gonna be a massive, massive thing for this game, and that's essentially something that does really end up working out well for the blue team. Would have been better if the red team honestly had a jungler that did not have such a strong ultimate. LeBlanc is your standard assassin. I did not really talk about Viego. Viego's scaling is good, but when it comes to Viego, he's an omnivore jungler. He's a really good, really standard omnivore jungler, and essentially he's gonna end up being the strongest if he ends up getting himself ahead. Viego in the late game, if he is not ahead, is a pretty mediocre champion. Like, he's okay, but he's not amazing, and he does not really do anything amazingly well. So that's a thing that is worth mentioning. When it comes to Silas is in a way similar to Viego, because he's more of a hyper carry than he is a standard late game scaling champion. And if he's able to get an advantage early on, he's really going to be able to hard carry the game. But if he's not, he's simply not going to be able to pop off as much. Now, a big advantage for this Silas is the fact that he has an Amumu against him, so he can always just play around of that. Like, that's a pretty good option for him. And then bot lane we have a Jhin and Leona into a Vel'Koz and a Caitlyn. Now, with the roles that both of you do tend to play, what can you tell me about the specifics of this lane? What is this lane all about? What does Jhin want to do? Okay, what do you think, Casper? Mm-hmm. Well, since both of you tend to be AD carries, we are going to focus mainly on the bot lane today. So, let's do a couple of things. First of all, let's move everyone. Go for it. Absolutely. He can. Absolutely. Yes, I agree with you. He can do that. Uh, Generally comes down to his decision making, but he can do it. And for example, if your LeBlanc ends up being fed enough, he can go forward, lock her in with his ultimate, and if his team is able to clean up the rest of your team, that should be enough to win him the fight. Now, before we start with the bot lane matchup, do you think any of those two teams wants to invade level 1? Whole team. They absolutely do. Like the blue team wants to go for an invade right there due to the following. First of all, they have more than enough CC. You have Leona, you have Viego, you have Morde, you have Silas, you have Jin. All of them have something to offer to this invade, and it does not really take too much for them to catch one person out. And to make it even better, the red team's bot lane has really low mobility, so regardless who they catch, it's gonna work really well for them. So they wanna take either this path that I ended up showing you, or this path, or even this path, but they just want to catch anyone and bare minimum get a flash. Like even getting a flash with this team setup is more than enough for the blue team to actually create that initial lead that they can start snowballing on, and that's essentially the thing that they want to try. While the red team on the other hand wants to try to make sure that that does not end up happening. Standard positioning when you're trying to deny an invade from happening is quite simply you wanna go forward, sit in that bush, you wanna sit in that bush. The moment you see them, you run back. You're always gonna have enough time to do it. Now the way we do not wanna position is anything like this, because if you're inside of this zone and you see them as they're walking out of this bush right there is always the possibility that they can flash engage on you, and then it ends up being way more messy than it should be. So if we're countering an invade, we always want to make sure that we're countering the invade properly. Back to the initial start of the game. How do you think the junglers should be patting? Like, do you think they should go bot top? I want you to answer that one for me. Why though? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good analysis. Let me show you the answer. First of all, Viego is a jungler that can really start anything. He can start blue, he can start red, he can do a solo buff, he can start wolves if he wants to, he can go for an invade. Like, he is extremely flexible. That's the number one. Number two, when it comes to this Viego's ganking pattern, he is omnivore, so he can really farm and aim to play around of the opportunities he gets. However, he does not really want to gank mid, because getting LeBlanc killed is an extremely hard thing to do, and it's really gonna require both of them to play perfectly well, so there is no reason for him to force the mid lane gank. He's basically gonna be leaving this mid lane as it is, no need to focus on that. Top lane, Morde and Viego do not really have as much of a kill pressure over Jax, and Jax is also a really hard champion to gank unless he ends up overextending really far. So for example, this is a situation in which Viego could try to go in for a gank, but if Jax is playing it out safely as he should, Viego is not really gonna go for that. His best bet is to start the red buff and to either go for a cheesy a level 2 gank bot to try to give that initial lead to Jin and Leona, or to finish the full bot side and to go for bot if possible. For him, bot is really the win condition, and that is the lane that for him is the most important to be ahead. Now if he does not get a good opportunity to go for bot right there, he simply wants to do the full clear, and he wants to essentially get to the top side, get the scuttle, and sees whether he gets an opportunity. That's not something that you can really plan far ahead, because it's either gonna happen or it's not gonna happen. That really ends up coming down to the game itself. Mumu, on the other hand, wants to start the blue buff because he is a champion that is really blue buff dependent. He's gonna get a nice little leash from Vel'Koz and Leona, and another reason why Vel'Koz and Leona want to give a leash to that Mumu is because they do not want to go in and really hard push for that level 2 prio. Because if they try to get the level 2 prio, what are they opening themselves up for? Absolutely. They're aware of that, so they're completely fine with giving a better leash to that Mumu, because they do know that they do not want the prio, they want to play the lane safely. So Mumu gets his nice leash, those two guys get back down, and taking into account what Caitlyn does know, which is that she's gonna be a primary target for the Viego, and taking into account that Caitlyn does know she does not wanna fight too hard, this game is a perfect game for this Caitlyn to pick up a cool level 1 and to simply play around of this zone, completely freezing the lane and just playing around the farming. Now I'm gonna get back to that lane in a moment. Mumu, on the other hand, this, he has significantly faster clear than a Viego does, and Viego is essentially going to be around of here, or he's going to be doing the grump by the time Mumu finishes the full clear, and Mumu has a really nice synergy with Jax right there, so he can go for an early gank. That's an extremely good opportunity for Mumu, because essentially, as I said, Jax and him do have an extremely good synergy as a number 1, and as a number 2, Morda is a champion that really does not have any mobility. He cannot escape the gank. So what's going to be happening right there is that worst case scenario, they get Morda's sums. Best case scenario, they end up being able to close out and get a kill on the guy. Make sense? Perfect. Another thing, Mumu does not really want to fight top lane Scuttle in a one-on-one setting against a Viego. The only situation in which he does contest the Scuttle, if he's able to get the gank off on Morda, and then he ends up rotating with his Jax to contest the Scuttle. If he cannot do this, he literally wants to back away, bat to the Scuttle on the bot side, take it, and repeat the full clear. Like Mumu wants to get the level 6, prior to the level 6 he's not really forcing anything, and after the level 6 he can start ganking a little bit more. Now we are gonna leave this Mumu, for example, right there, and we are gonna leave Viego right there, and we are gonna go back to the bot lane. So this lane is, as we said, our primary focus. We do have the zones that end up looking like this. This zone is what we do know. Let's use green. This zone is what we know as a neutral zone, right? So right there, no one really has an advantage. It's neutral. This zone is for one team defensive, for the other team aggressive, and again, this zone for one team ends up being aggressive, while for the other team it ends up being defensive. Jin and Leona, as we said before, have an amazing gank setup. They have an amazing catching potential, and they generally want to play this lane rather aggressively. They want to try to find an opening to create a lead early on, and then with that lead, they want to start snowballing the lane, and then later on the game as well. Now, in order, go for it. They can do 2v2, they can do it with the help of a jungler. It comes down to a single thing, and that is Leona able to get a good catch? If Leona is able to get a good catch, they can win the 2 versus 2 quite easily. But, and this is a huge but, we're gonna talk about the red bot lane win conditions in a couple of moments. That's actually when you're gonna see what the but is. And another big thing, those two want to try to get the level 2 prio. For them, a level 2 prio is enough to actually start winning the lane as a whole. Occasionally, you're gonna get those lanes in which level 2 prio ends up being so important that if you're able to get it and use it properly, you're gonna be able to win the whole lane off of it. This is a lane in which that is quite simply the case. The best way they can do it is essentially give that Viego a little bit of a smaller leash, which they can do because, well, Viego is generally a pretty healthy jungler, and they want to get to the lane before Caitlyn and Valkos do, hard shoving the wave as quickly as possible. And once they manage to do that, they want to be essentially playing around of this zone. Now, this lane can end up at this moment going in 2 directions. Jin and Leona are either gonna be able to get the level 2 prio and get an engage right there, or they will not. If they are able to get the prio and get an engage right there, what's gonna happen is that worst case scenario, they're gonna get sums off of one of those guys. Like, that's a certain win. There is no way they lose that engage. And if they are able to get the engage, well, essentially what they're gonna try to do is hard shove the wave into the turret like this and look for a cheat recall. Like, that's how they can create that initial lead. And another really big thing that they are denying is that they are denying Vel'Koz and Caitlyn's ability to poke them down, because Vel'Koz and Caitlyn essentially benefit the longer Jin and Leona end up being in the lane with no recall. Because, well, if they end up staying there trying to siege them under the turret, Vel'Koz is going to be able to hit them with the skill shots. Caitlyn is going to be able to poke them down with no punishment. And this, for example, for Jin and Leona, is a really bad situation. It's a situation that they do not want to end up prolonging. That's why they want to try to bail on the lane quite early and back away to go and do something else, basically. Makes sense? Now, the other scenario is the scenario in which Jin and Leona fail to get the level 2 prio. If they fail to get the level 2 prio, they do not want to walk up like this, because they are not going to be strong enough to collapse the wave into the turret, but instead they want to back away slowly, and they want to be playing around of this zone. This is going to enable them, first of all, to have enough space to try to dodge the poke, to try to dodge the skill shots. They can move around quite easily. Leona can play around of the bushes to engage on 2 of them trying to set up a catch, and in case they do get a catch, they're gonna have enough space to run down Caitlyn and Valkos, which is a really big thing. Like if they end up, even if they end up playing too close to the red team's turret, like this for example, even if Leona gets an engage, quite quickly she can end up being in the turret's range, and even if she does not end up being in the turret's range, they are simply not going to be able to close out on Caitlyn and Viego due to the fact that they're not going to have enough space to run them down, and that again ends up being a really big thing. Does that make sense? Perfect. So essentially, as this game keeps prolonging, both the junglers are really going to be trying to, or not necessarily both the junglers. Let me go back to this. So, Viego has this lane as his main priority. Amumu does not. Amumu can end up playing a round of Jax and Mordekaiser until he gets the level 6. For the Amumu, there is no real reason to focus on this half of the map until he has the level 6. He wants to go in on Jhin and Leona after he has the 6, because that is essentially when it is going to be way more valuable, and being able to get those 1 or 2 early ganks to that Jax before the level 6 is going to be more than enough to get the Jax running, and it's going to essentially make this lane it's going to make this top lane a straightforward, a winning lane for Jax. He's simply not going to end up being in a situation that he's losing to Morde. So that's how Amumu ends up playing into his own win condition by forcing the level 6 quite quickly, turning his top into a win condition because he's, as we said, going forward, ganking the Jax, helping him get fed, and then after he has the 6, he's gonna be rotating bot, trying to set himself up with a nice skirmish on that lane. Also, if he ends up playing it out this way, this Amumu is gonna end up having prio over the first void grubs, and there is absolutely nothing this Viego can do about it. He cannot stop it. Like 2 versus 2, if Jax is ahead early on, that's a pure win for Amumu and Jax, and that's why Viego basically wants to give up on this lane quite easily, and he wants to focus on bot. Another thing when it comes to the bot lane, this Viego can be extremely creative when it comes to ganking. He can take a number of ganking opportunities. He can do this if those two end up overextending. He can go for a straight gank. He can even go for a lane gank, and he can make it work. So this lane is really his primary focus, and what this Caitlyn and Valkos want to do is try to keep the lane in their passive zone. So they want to give up the prio of the lane completely. They don't really need it. They want to sit in this safe position right there so that there is no way they get ganked, and from this safe position they can keep firing stuff at Leona and Jhin, poking them down constantly, and Jhin and Leona are going to have a really hard time dealing with it because they essentially have no sustain. Make sense? So that's essentially how the Caitlyn and Valkos end up playing a war of attrition. In addition to that, they're creating a really nice setup for their Amumu, because this is a position that for Amumu is extremely gankable. He hits the Q, he can hit the Q on a minion, does not even have to hit the Jhin, and he can gank like this, he can gank like this, he can gank like this, he can gank like this. Like the moment the Jhin and Leona end up overextending and overcommitting, right there, like this, they are in a situation that is extremely gankable. Even if a Viego tries to go in for a lane gank, it's not gonna work out. Because with how safe Caitlyn and Valkos are, there is simply not much that can be done, and Jin and Leona have no way to really poke down Caitlyn and Valkos. Like, for as long as those two play it out well enough, they're gonna be in this super safe area, being at full health and just firing things at Leona and Jin without them being able to do anything about it. So this lane is an atrocious lane for Jin and Leona for as long as Caitlyn and Valkos end up playing it well enough. They have that one chance to win throughout that level 2, and then everything after that ends up coming down to Valkos and Caitlyn actually making a mistake. There is basically, there is literally nothing that the two of them can do to win the lane as the lane progresses. Like, they're simply not gonna be getting an advantage no matter what they do. Make sense? So yeah, like, that's what this lane ends up looking, and those two guys, Caitlyn and Valkos, are waiting for Diamumu to finish off Jin and Leona. Like, that's gonna be a pretty easy play, especially with the sync that the Mumu has with the Valkos right there. So every time he ends up going forward to gank that with his ultimate, that's gonna be a double kill. Those two are gonna be sent to base. And even when Valkos and Leona end up having not Valkos and Leona, but Valkos and Caitlyn, even when they end up having a lead in this matchup, they still wanna be playing around of this safe zone without overextending, because when you're facing such a hard engage support such as a Leona, and such a high damage AD carry such as Jin, you always have to respect that. Like, you don't want to end up giving them a single opportunity they can use to get themselves ahead. Like, way better to continue creating and grinding your lead safely and steadily, and simply once you're certain that you just brute force win the fight, that's when you actually want to start fighting. That's what, again, this one ends up looking like when it comes to Diamumu. Generally, he wants to try to collect the second spawn of Void Grubs with the Jax, and he would want to try to take down this lane and this turret quite easily, so that he's able to open up the possibility of Jax pressuring like this. This is going to be massive for the red team. Like, the moment this turret goes down, Jax is going to be able to start pushing pretty deep, like this basically. And what that is going to do is that it is going to be driving a lot of pressure away from the bottom lane. So once this starts happening, Caitlyn and Valkos can actually start capitalizing on it by taking the first turret bot themselves, and by overall fighting it more aggressively. Because, well, in essence, this guy's gonna be forced to go top, trying to stop Jax, because Jax is just gonna continue popping off, and that leaves this turret as a pretty safe option to be taken out like this, and then essentially the red team can just continue sieging both, or we are gonna use this actually. By doing this, the red team can just continue to siege this side lane turret as well, and essentially Jin and Leona are gonna be forced to try to defend it. And then Silas LeBlanc matchup, it's irrelevant how it goes really. Like, even though LeBlanc is the assassin, and even though she's usually the champion that is able to carry the games quite easily, in this game she is not red team's primary carry. This lane essentially just going even more than enough. This lane just going even is more than enough. The red team is gonna be able to continue collecting the objectives until they get to the point that they simply feel comfortable enough to group up and brute force throughout the mid lane, because they have a team fighting potential that is absolutely amazing. Like Amumu, Jax, Vel'Koz, LeBlanc, Caitlyn, especially with Jax being ahead, Caitlyn essentially being ahead, LeBlanc being even. That's a massive amount of damage, and there is nothing the blue team can end up doing in order to deal with it. So essentially, it is just going to be the game of snowballing, with the blue team constantly withdrawing until we get to the point that the red team is able to just break through into the blue team's base and essentially starts taking the inhibs, so that they can go in and fundamentally finish the game. Thoughts? Yeah, that's like, it's a lot of it really ends up depending on this guy being able to do okay into the murder. Though again, like, a lot of it also comes down to this little guy, because if he ends up trying to force, for example, ganks on Silas, I mean, it's not really gonna work out, because they do not have enough damage to kill a Silas, and a Silas can actually quite easily turn this fight against them, and he can win this, even if it's a 2-on-1. So that's why Amumu wants to stay away from this lane. And again, for him, also trying to gank bot too early is not gonna work out unless Jin and Leona are poked down really hard. If those two are full health, well, it is honestly not such an easy lane to gank, and that's why his best bet is to go there, like gank this Morde, due to the synergy the two guys have, and due to the fact that Morde has literally no mobility. He has no way to escape this lane early on, and that's a free gank. Like, every time he ends up ganking it, he's gonna get something out of it. Worst case scenario sums, best case scenario he ends up getting a kill, and he ends up being able to play around with it. Feel free. Not really, because I don't think, or it's not even about me not thinking. Like, pre-level 6, he does not wanna gank bot, because if you compare this from the standpoint of, let's say, a level 3 fight, the only thing Amumu really has is his Q. He has no damage, he's not super tanky, like, he can end up queuing into them, but that's it. Caitlyn has the damage, but Caitlyn also does not have so much damage. Her damage is definitely good, don't get me wrong, but her damage is not really enough to single-handedly win this lane. And in addition to that one, Vel'Koz also ends up not having as much damage this early. He gets the damage as he scales, literally. And if he does not have the scaling, well, he's not really gonna have the damage either. Go for it, feel free. Kalista and Varus. Why would you have two AD carries? Why would you have two AD carries? Well, Kalista and Varus, after level 6, yes. But before level 6, there is no need for it. It's a pointless engage, honestly. He has nothing, and you do not have as much damage before you get your ultimates either. So like, there is no reason to try to coin toss it. Like, you do know that you win by default past level 6. Way better to wait for the level 6 and go forward and get the fights rolling once you do get your level 6. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's way too because but the thing is that the only thing a Momo gets is his Q. Now, like, the way Red Team actually wins this is that Jin has to misposition extremely badly. Like, he has to be like there, so that Amumu gets the catch on Jin. Vel'Koz ends up being able to pull off the full combo on Jin, and Caitlyn ends up being able to finish him off. So if they wipe out Jin like that, they can collapse on two other guys, but essentially Vel'Koz has his cooldowns, so I mean, he did what he could. Those two should simply be able to back away after Jin gets caught. They do not want to prolong the fight. But if Amumu cannot get the engage on Jin, if he ends up hitting Leona, for example, well, those guys have way more options. Like, Leona is also going to have an aftershock. She can simply ignore Amumu. He's completely useless. Just ignore the guy. She can end up shifting, turning onto Caitlyn. Bam, bam, dead, bam, dead, dead. Like, it's way too hard. It takes way more luck and way more skill from the red team to win this fight than it takes the blue side. Like, those guys have two extremely good engaged champs and a carry. They simply have to protect the carry so he does not get engaged on, and that's it. And they cannot misposition. If he ends up being there while those two are there, I mean, yeah, they're gonna win it. They're gonna win the fight. No questions asked. But for as long as he ends up positioning decently, this fight is gonna be won by the blue team, because Amumu is first of all way too useless this early in the game, and in addition to Amumu being way too useless, you have the fact that you're not really gonna have an easy time getting to Jin. I'm glad to hear it. Like, do you have any extra questions about it? Like, if you do, hmm that's pretty good. Nothing else I wanna add up either. Like, this is how the game should have ended up. This is how the game should have ended up. Uh, Looking for the, in essence, for both teams. And as I said, I do think this game is pretty red team oriented. And yeah, like with that, we are done